Hi everybody, TheHande here, and welcome back to the Leaders of Finland series, and today I wanted to talk about the Finnish presidential elections. Now, I've mentioned before that these days the Finnish presidency is a little bit weak because the Finnish government really holds all of the power. However, I am not one of these people who thinks that the presidency should be dissolved or anything. The whole point of having a president in the first place is to have kind of a backup plan in the extremely unlikely scenario that the Finnish government is somehow incapable of doing their job, so it helps to have a very experienced head of state standing by as a kind of plan B in case everything else goes wrong. And this is why I actually wish people actually cared a little bit more about the presidential elections, because the last two in particular have been noted for their very low voter turnout. So anyway, Finland chooses the president through direct elections. This is in contrast to indirect elections, such as the one that they use in the United States with the Electoral College. Fun fact, Finland actually used to have its own Electoral College, and I will talk about that in this video as well. So because, of course, the presidential term is 6 years, elections are also held every 6 years unless there is some crisis. And the Finnish system is pretty simple. Every party nominates a person that the general public votes for. The person who has accomplished a simple majority of the vote, that is to say over 50%, will either become president, or a second round of voting with the two nominees with the highest amount of votes is held, and then the person who got the most votes in the first round usually wins that round. Amazingly, the presidential election has only ever been won on the first round once during this current system. That was our most recent one in 2018, when Sauli Niinistö was re-elected with a rather healthy over 60% of the vote. In fact, the first 3 elections under the popular vote system were surprisingly close, but never so close that there would have been a big upset. Now yes, 1994 was the first time that a president was elected through direct elections, but technically it could have already happened in 1988. That's when Mauno Koivisto was seeking re-election, and there was this weird hybrid direct vote system and the Electoral College. Fun fact, Koivisto's wife, Tellervo Koivisto, was actually in the Electoral College that voted him for a second term, although that was because she was also a member of parliament. So what of this Electoral College then? Well, in the olden days, of course, people voted for their candidates, but they also needed to vote for the Electoral College, which was 300 people, and if you watch my previous videos, you know that that's 100 people more than the Finnish parliament. And just like with the popular vote system, the candidate who received the simple majority, that is to say more than 150 votes, would become president. But beyond that, the Electoral College vote was quite a bit different from the popular vote in that there was no system which forced only the 2 highest candidates to go into a second round of voting. Therefore, if you look at some of the voting histories of the Finnish Electoral College, you will see that there were a few instances where there needed to be as many as 3 rounds of voting. Now, a lot of this had to do, of course, that in the early years, politics was very fragmented, especially on the center-right, and in the early days, pretty much nobody would back up a socialist president. That, of course, changed rather dramatically during the 1980s. But there were also a good number of elections that were settled on the first round of voting. Koivisto's first election, for instance, as well as all 4 times that Kekkonen was elected president. The one thing that is kind of fun about the Electoral College, in my view, is the fact that the guy counting the votes actually had to read them all out. So of course there exists this very well-known clip of the guy counting the votes for Kekkonen saying his name over and over again as he's going over the ballots.
Kekkonen, 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 Kekkonen.
The only other times when Finland did not have an Electoral College vote was the very first presidential election, which was actually selected by the current members of parliament. Well, that was because the Electoral College did not exist at that time. Risto Ryti, who replaced Kyösti Kallio, who ended up dying in office before his resignation came into power, was directly elected in 1940, but he insisted on getting another election in 1943, which is why the previous Electoral College was called in. This election, however, has kind of retroactively been considered not quite so valid, because of course Ryti then ended up resigning the following year at the end of World War II, thus having technically served as less than 1 full term as a president. And like I said, our most lowest voter turnout was actually the 2012 elections, where Sauli Niinistö was elected for the first time. That was also historical because the second round of voting included Pekka Haavisto, whom I briefly featured in another video. And it's kind of sad that the voter turnout was so terrible that year, because that always tends to put a dampener on the final results, like they don't really feel that valid. The 1994 elections were also very notable, because the person who challenged Martti Ahtisaari in the second round of voting was Elisabeth Rehn from the Swedish People's Party, which gives you an inkling of just how unpopular the other big parties' candidates had to have been that year. But still, this election was surprisingly close, with Ren amassing still a very impressive 46% of the vote. The main thing about the direct elections, which I always kind of prefer over the Electoral College votes, is that the votes that went to the Electoral College did not always necessarily go to the person they most expect. One of the big reasons why some of these presidential elections were so contested was because none of the parties would back up a single nominee, which of course would often require some wheeling and dealing in order to get people on the same boat, and which is why losers like Lauri Relander ended up becoming our president, because the only person that everybody would vote for would be someone as namby-pamby as him. And also, all the way until 1982, when Mauno Koivisto was elected the first time, several members of the Electoral College threatened to vote for a dark horse candidate, Ahti Karjalainen, if Koivisto didn't win on the first round, despite him not even being on the ballot. And the reason this threat was even considered a reality was that there was no legislation saying that the Electoral College members couldn't do this, which was a rule that needed to be written into law after Koivisto was elected the first time. I'm TheHande. See you on the next one.